Because I have a long history that predates the development of the Rose system. I spent 25 years as a trauma psychologist. I did about 10 years in leadership development, and I was really kind of clipping along. And it wasn't until I had my cancer diagnosis that I really had to evaluate sort of the nature of my life and the work that I was doing. So I had been working actually with predominantly men for about 10 years, men in high-powered leadership roles. And I'd also noticed a lot of those men were, had themselves trauma histories and just issues with repeating unhealthy relationships. But it wasn't until I really had to take the most incredibly painful look at my own life to realize that I had swallowed a narcissist magnet.
Welcome to Unmute with Priya, the podcast where silence ends, voices rise, and women rediscover the freedom to speak and live authentically, especially in life after 40. This show is proudly sponsored by Project Icon. I'm your host, Priya Sudarsanam. Let's dive into today's conversation. Today, we're talking with Dr. Sage Breslin, narcissistic abuse recovery expert and creator of the Rose system. Dr. Breslin helps people break free from emotionally manipulative relationships, rebuild their sense of self, and reclaim their voice and power after abuse. I am really excited for this conversation because your work brings both clarity and empowerment to a space that's often misunderstood. Dr. Breslin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so let's dive in. What led you into this work? Was there a personal or professional moment that made you realize this was the path that you were meant to take?
Yeah, I always, I get that question and I don't ever really know where to begin because I have a long history that predates the development of the Rose system. I spent 25 years as a trauma psychologist. I did about 10 years in leadership development, and I was really kind of clipping along. And it wasn't until I had my cancer diagnosis that I really had to evaluate sort of the nature of my life and the work that I was doing. People call that the come to Jesus meeting. I keep on having those meetings, every few years.
Yeah.
And I at this point in time, I've tried to send a message heavenward to say, God, I am listening. No more divine 2x4 therapy, please. Yeah. So I had been working actually with predominantly men for about 10 years, men in high-powered leadership roles. And I'd also noticed a lot of those men were, had themselves trauma histories and, just issues with repeating unhealthy relationships. But it wasn't until I really had to take the most incredibly painful look at my own life to realize that I had swallowed a narcissist magnet. I had done something and I'd done it again and again and again. And I thought, it's going to die to this. This is going to kill me.
Yeah.
And when I really dug into it, what came forth during my journey was, in my opinion, the answer that other therapists weren't finding. And I thought when I finally did get back to work, I thought, I'm going to play with this. I'm going to see if this makes a difference with my clients. And all of a sudden, things that people who had just been struggling, it's like, the clouds opened and there was this like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this beautiful forward movement. And I thought, that's it. And I thought, all right, I've done it for myself. Now I'm really going to have to look at how can I do this consistently with other women and other women like myself. So people who are particularly high achieving women in leadership roles, because I realized I can no longer do one-on-one service every hour of the day. This is too much stress on my body, and I have bone marrow cancer. So despite the fact I've now reached a remission, this is a very aggressive, rare cancer, right? And if you just look at it the wrong way, it'll just come back and it'll be there to end you. And so I'm not interested in taking that on. I'm interested in being here and being a mom to my 5 kids and being a Mimi to my grandchildren and to be here for my clients. So I really had to look at how I was working with people. And I thought, I want to work with people in leadership roles, not because I'm just bougie and want to work with the C-suite.
Right, right.
I want to work with people who are going to affect not only their families and their friends, but their teams and their communities. And I want them to be able to be a one-to-many. I want to be one-to-many through them. So I think that there's just so much better reach when you're helping people in leadership roles be their best selves, be, all that they can be in the leadership role rather than just limping along.
Absolutely. What a powerful mission. And I think that so many organizations could benefit from this. There are people, even just like myself in a small business, who are in leadership roles that could really benefit from this support. I have a question about narcissistic abuse. So people often don't realize that they're in a narcissistic dynamic until much later. Why is that type of abuse hard to recognize from the inside?
Well, narcissists by nature, they don't have their own power source, right? So they have to be dependent on other people for validation, emotional regulation, so they're going to look for people to, put their tentacles on. And since their lives really depend on that, they are really super good at the manipulation involved with getting people on board and staying on. So, I mean, it really is in their best interest if their targets, their prospects, aren't aware that this is not real per se, but that it's just narcissistic manipulation. So, they've got great skills. They're very charming most of the time. They're often very charismatic, well-spoken, well-trained, often really bright. And so what we notice from them is all those features. And they make great work of everything that comes out of our mouths, all the stories we tell, all our demographics. They use those and then they try to mirror them in some way, so that we then fall for them. So if they hear that we've had a recent loss, they'll put on that show of saying, I'm so sorry. This must be so painful. I lost my mom last year. And they'll engage us to provide support to them for their loss. And they will do that until there's so much that seems to be connecting us that we feel like we've known them forever. And we fall deeper and deeper into it. And that is great for them. And as soon as we're really hooked, then they can stop. Stop the love bombing.
To my soul. This is speaking to every single adult relationship that I've been in since I was an adult. It definitely resonates with me about why it was so hard to detect, because it just felt like connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think especially for, the more high achieving or more high profile woman, it feels as if there's shame that gets attached to it.
Right.
Not even just embarrassment, but shame, like I should have known better. How come I keep picking the same person? Or why do I go back to him or her, even though I already realized this isn't a good thing? It's not healthy for me. And that's where sort of the secret sauce came to mind during my journey of like, so why does this happen to us women? It's not just that they're really good at their games, because I would then feel like, well, how come I wasn't better at seeing their game,
Right.
And what I realized is that for those of us who are old souls, our mission is to heal, protect, and serve others. So when they're around us, when there's a person around us that has need, most of us can feel it. That need detector is right there, because our mission, right, is to fix it, is to heal it, is to support it, it's to bring love and joy and resources and to really help the person. And, so it makes us quite vulnerable to the people who are using that for their own gain. And, then once we're in, we get so diminished by the outlay that it's hard to get out.
Yeah, and you talk about being so diminished. So that's actually my next question. So one of the biggest impacts that women, I mean, I can speak to women, I can't speak to men who have been in narcissistic relationships, but that females who have survived a narcissistic relationship, they describe it's losing trust in themselves. So why does narcissistic abuse attack? Why does it attack identity so deeply?
Sure. Yeah, that was a very easy response to that one. It's ugly, but it's easy. And that is that for most of us, once we get in and we realize that we've now sort of entered the dangerous game, in the beginning, we are listening and realizing there's something hinky about this. Something is
Right.
off now, especially once they stop the manipulation and they start the gaslighting. So they're not love bombing now. Now that's off, and now we're the source of all evil. That's when, right in the beginning, we have a sense that there's something wrong with this picture.
Yes.
But we don't quite know what it is because we've sort of put our old souls into the vault to keep it safe. And now we're just this sort of human meat suit trying to figure it all out. And in that position, we become vulnerable to the narcissist because of something called Stockholm syndrome. And I have an upcoming book where I think I'm going to rename the thing and then try to send it into the APA and see if they'll put a new name on this thing, because almost no one remembers what happened in Stockholm in the 70s. But Stockholm syndrome is basically a coping strategy that we develop when we're in danger and when there's no end in sight. It came up initially with a bank robbery where they took hostages, and the hostages were held for a fairly long period of time, and they had to figure out how to navigate being with their captors and not get harmed or killed.
This is amazing because I've heard of Stockholm syndrome and I never, ever once connected it to not being in this narcissistic relationships. But
and most people
oh my God.
don't.
Yeah.
But when you
Wow.
think about it, when you're in a narcissistic relationship, most of your time is spent trying to make sure they're happy, that they have what they need, that their needs are met, that they're
Definitely.
fulfilled, and that you are not the target of some other demand or another dose of gaslighting or abuse or whatever. So in order to do that, you really have to orient to them and their world. And if their reality is one thing, you have to espouse that reality. If they say the sky is green, your answer right down into your heart has to be, you're right, I wonder which shade they would call that. Even if you used to know that the sky is blue, that's not going to help you in a narcissistic relationship. It's going to hurt you.
I think you are going to validate so many people who are listening to this episode, because I'm getting validated right now. Thank you so much, because I always wondered, why am I agreeing to this? I mean, I don't remember the specific situations, but why am I agreeing that the sky is green when I know it's blue? It's to keep the peace.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes beyond that people-pleasing thing. It really goes into the space of you're fighting for your life. And if you have kids with someone like that, then you're not just fighting for your life. You've got kids.
Yes. Yeah.
So it becomes easier to take on that reality than to just say yes. So sort of just saying yes, even though you really mean no. It's a little bit more, passive aggressive. Stockholm syndrome is the real deal. You learn to say yes because your life depends on it. You learn to not only say yes, but to validate whatever it is they say. And that becomes incredibly confusing.
Right.
Because it isn't yours. It doesn't live in your soul. And your
Right.
soul would never support it, right?
Absolutely.
Then, if by grace you are somehow you can exit the relationship, you're cast out, somehow it gets that you separate from the relationship, the first thing most people say is, I don't even know who I am. I don't know why I was in that. I don't know why I couldn't get out. I don't remember exactly who I used to be. I don't want this to happen again. And confusion is a big word that people use at that sort of at the tail end and after a narcissistic relationship because they don't understand what happened.
Yeah, and probably asking like, how did this happen? I was so strong before. I was independent. I was doing this. Yeah. So I want to talk about the rose system. So you created the rose system. Can you walk us through what that framework is and why it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ROSE system stands for Restoring Old Soul Empowerment. So the
I love
notion
it.
is, how do we plug our souls back in? And we call it, how do we put our souls back in the driver's seat? Because those of us who are old souls, we really are connected to this divine power source. And
Absolutely.
it's what makes us unstoppable. It's why we're so high achieving. It's why we're full of passion and just internal power. And so when people go through this kind of experience, this journey, this terrible tango, and they've got to put their soul away for safekeeping, oftentimes they forget to put the soul back in the driver's seat. And
Absolutely.
they feel like they can't get themselves back. They can't get their mojo back. Even when they're no longer in the relationship, they keep choosing the same kind of relationship. And
Right.
you can tell they've been derailed. So the most important thing, in my opinion, and what I learned during my own journey was if we can help them put the soul back in the driver's seat, we tend to do a lot better and we tend to heal a lot faster. That's sort of the goal of the system, goal of all the programs and services we do are kind of helping you connect to your sovereign self. And the way we do that is first we figure out what's happened. And a lot of people who have shame about being in unhealthy or toxic relationships, they'll minimize what's happened. They'll minimize the level of abuse or the level of the impact. And that's our number one step, is to say, well, you can minimize it and remain sick, or we can identify what actually did happen. And we're going to rename things and we're going to visit it with a level of clarity that you haven't had because you develop Stockholm syndrome. So once in and we're able to identify what's happened, then we look at the impacts. And then we look back into your past history to see, is there anything in the past that bears any resemblance to this? Is there
Okay.
anything that would have made you more vulnerable to doing the same thing over and over again?
So
And
you're
once
finding the root cause
exactly.
of
And so
this.
once we can find the root cause, and for some people, they'll find it in a lifetime before this one.
Mm,
Oftentimes, though, we're really able to find it fairly quickly. And then it's a matter of really cutting all those ties and tethers, chopping off all the roots right down at the very beginning. And when we do that, then we can go ahead and reactivate the soul. And the way we do that is through some form of sound healing. And when I say some form, I can look up to my bookshelf right now. I've got, a Tibetan bowl behind me. I've got a crystal bowl here. But we also have one of our practitioners uses his own voice to help calibrate people to their sort of soul activation. We have another who uses light language. So there are lots and
amazing.
lots of different ways to do that. But you think it's a frequency, like holding a tuning fork. We want to find that person's frequency and really help them espouse and embrace that. And when it happens for people, it is interesting how quickly they will say, I feel different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we're able to really look at, all right, now if you're going to move forward and you have this activation now, you have this connection to your soul again, it's ready to make the decisions for you. Now, what does your life look like? What is the path ahead? You can't just build on an old broken foundation. That would be guaranteeing that the house will fall again. So we go back down, clear everything down to the ground, raise it 100%.
This is
Then when
amazing
we
because go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, so then once it's reactivated, we can rebuild and we know that there's no rubble. There's no princess and a pea. There's
Yeah.
nothing underneath that foundation that doesn't fully support that growth and that forward movement.
I love the sound. I love that you talk about the soul and the divine self, because obviously we're going deep into spirituality here and looking beyond our human selves when we're doing this work. And when you talk about frequency and vibration, you're essentially calibrating yourself with who you're meant to, who your full expression of your soul.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me some success stories of people that you've worked with and where they started, and then after, even maybe after a session with you, what happened within their body.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I have one that I can tell you. Before I actually developed the system itself, I was playing with portions and I was still seeing both men and women. And I had a very powerful CEO come in for a session. He had just kind of heard about me and he wanted to come in and try it out. And he wanted me to describe, what is this thing you do? And at that point, it's a little hard to describe. And he was not very woo-woo, as they say.
Yeah.
And he wanted to know kind of what was happening with him that he would lose his temper at his child. Again, he had a huge team, hundreds of people in his team. But the thing he was most concerned about, he didn't mind yelling at his employees. The thing he was most concerned about was that he could get into it with I think the boy was then about 8, and he would lose it. And he would say and do things that were just not good father material. And he didn't like this about himself. In fact, he was pretty ashamed. And so we decided just to do a deep dive. And after 90 minutes had discovered, just by tracing the roots down to his own experience, his own very narcissistic mother, and a sociopathic dad who then took off, and how he was treated. And we went down to this stellar moment in time that was absolutely where he was operating from.
Wow.
And we brought in comfort for that version of him, closed up the session, did some breathing, brought it back, did a little bit of sound healing. When I say a little bit, I'm talking 2 or 3 minutes. And he had been weeping during the whole session. He came back and he said, "Oh my God, I've never experienced anything like that." And I said, "Well, the test is I want you to go home now. And you're going to come back next week. You don't even have to do a whole session. I just want to know what your experience was like."
Right.
He comes back in the next week and he's got a list on his phone. And I said, "Did you make some notes?" And he said, "Yeah, these are all the people I'm going to refer to you today." And I said, "That's lovely. Thank you. But what was your experience like?" And he said, "Well, I want to test it out over time, but it's been 8 days. And 8 days, I fell in love with my child over and over and over again."
That is, fall in love with your child.
That is just what I wanted to hear, right? And he said, and then it made me like myself more.
Yeah.
Because suddenly I realized I had the power to break this pattern and create something new that allowed me to be a better version of myself operationally. It's not just knowing like, "Oh, I feel better about myself. That's great."
Right.
Yeah, we'd all love to feel better about ourselves. But what was even more important was that functionally he was a better version of himself. And that was something that he continued to speak about both privately and publicly. So that's just one,
And that was after one 90-minute session with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just so impactful because, I'm a mother of 5. And so near and dear to my heart is when a parent who, could absolutely have been behaving pretty badly is then able to identify the source of the problem and fix it and actually change their behavior, not just the way they feel. Yeah, that was, I think, the first time where I just really knew in my heart, this is real. I have now hit my stride. This is really where I want to stay. I want to live in this space of healing.
It's a beautiful space. It's an amazing one. And it sounds like it's lasts. It's not, you don't have to stay in the cycle. It gets you out of that spiral. So I wanted to talk about, because I've been hearing this word a lot, or these words a lot, trauma bonds. I hear it
constantly. I see it on social media. The trauma bonds that keep people stuck in relationships, even after it ends. What's the most misunderstood part in your experience of breaking a trauma bond?
Okay, there's a law in physics where that basically says unless you move an object that's in motion, unless you derail it in some way, it will continue to move forward in that same motion. And in many ways, breaking a trauma bond is truly breaking a trauma bond requires that you alter the path of that motion or emotion or that emotional response.
Okay.
And I think more often than not, people think of, well, I'll just not talk to that person ever again, or I'll get some therapy and then it'll go away. And that was kind of the reality behind the kind of services we provide that made best sense to me, is that we can't just talk about something and process it. We actually have to alter it.
Absolutely.
If we go back in time or if we do it in real time, whatever it is, we have to actually stop that forward movement and derail it so that it either doesn't exist anymore or that it's got a new kind of forward movement. So I know that's probably a strange response to
No, it's
questions,
perfect. Yeah.
but
It's when you think in terms of energy, I mean, everything is
yeah.
energy. Everything is energy. And so when everything leaves imprints, so just as when you step in mud, you leave an imprint, but then there's energetic imprints. And so a lot of times we're walking through life unaware of what those invisible imprints are. And it sounds like your work really gets to the root of those things and finds those imprints.
I would like to think so. That's my intention at the very least. And
What
that's
I'm
where
getting from talking to you. So yeah, it's amazing. What is a common, you're doing deep soul work and talking about this divine source. You're talking about a lot of spiritual terms. What's a misconception that people have around this work, or people have around this healing, or people have around narcissistic abuse? What in your experience?
Well, I think since we've been talking about energy and about divinity and sovereignty, I would say that a lot of folks who don't have a sense of, what is there beyond this plane of being? What is some power that's higher than myself? Well, if I don't have God, I can't come see her, you know. And the answer to that is no, that's not correct. I've seen plenty of atheists. And I will say that most of them are not atheists when they leave. At the very least, they're usually in some form of like agnostic position where they still may not know exactly what does it look like or does it have a name or how does it function, but they are able to recognize there's something greater than themselves.
Yeah.
And they are able to trust that that exists. So the first misconception is if I don't have that already, can I not get this kind of healing? And the answer is no. Other misconceptions. I read an article recently about how our clinical terms are getting tossed around and popularized in a way that is not useful.
Yes.
Everybody's triggered. There's trauma everywhere. Everybody's talking about trauma bonds. Lots of people talking about narcissistic abuse or referring to people as narcissists who are just being pills, or being
I hear
nasty.
DSM-5 diagnoses being thrown around daily.
Yeah. So I would just say that, narcissistic abuse is something very real. It has deep and extended kinds of impacts on the people that it affects. It isn't just something that we turn the other cheek to. It isn't just something that people get over. I would be completely out of business if that were the case. We could all just watch a YouTube and be fine. And that is just not the case. That the kind of healing we're talking about really requires the depth of finding it within yourself and finding the soul where you've placed it in safekeeping and learning to have that courage to open the vault and do the work with somebody who can either hold space or guide or mentor or all of the above. So that's probably the biggest misconception. The two biggest are, number one, I can't have the real healing unless I believe in God or something like that.
Really?
And the second is, that you can just get over it. I tell people, we're just going to get into it.
I
And
love that. Get into it. Yeah. Yeah. Can narcissists recover? In your experience, has
I would
anybody ever
tell
come
you
to you
that
saying,
there is
I'm
no
a narcissist and I want to get better?
there's no research to support if somebody is truly a narcissist, the likelihood is that they will not shift or change position. They can learn routines. There is some research on that, and those routines might improve a relationship, but there is not any indication that they will be responsive to, say, therapy. You can take somebody with a pretty good, well-functioning borderline personality, and you can do DBT with them, and you can do long-term work with them. And if they can embrace it and they can learn those skills, they can shore up that sense of self and they can be well-functioning.
Okay.
Narcissists and sociopaths do not respond in the
They
same
do
way.
not respond in the same way.
Yeah.
That's good to know because I think that's often what kept me hooked in is the hope that, or there was
I
just
just love
enough,
it.
yeah, just enough hope to keep me hooked in.
And
What?
we all women are right. That's our jam. Hope is our jam. Like,
Definitely. Definitely. What's been the most challenging part of doing this work? Either emotionally, professionally, what is for you?
yeah. I don't get a lot of like emotional depletion anymore. I've really learned how to stay in my lane. I've
That's
learned how to
good.
ground myself out at the end of the day. I would say the harder thing professionally is that, especially for high achieving women or women in leadership roles, they don't want to identify that they have fallen for this or fallen for this more than once.
Mm,
Don't want to out themselves. They really feel embarrassed and ashamed. And so um, I think they find it harder to just identify, hey, this has happened to me too, and I want help. So I think it's maybe learning how to market in such a way that women can hear this. Women in leadership roles can hear this material and then know, like, they can reach me privately. They don't have to out themselves on LinkedIn. They can message me, they can call me, they can email me, and then we're going to have conversations that are completely confidential. And whether, I promise most people to come and have a conversation on me, totally complimentary.
right.
And if what you get in the space of 45 minutes is meaningful for you, then you can hire me if you want to or not, your choice. But it really is helping people to understand that there is not only a privacy, but a confidentiality that protects them. I mean, especially as a psychologist now, I just got the PsyPack TAP, which is a cross-state licensure for 43 states. So,
Amazing. Congratulations.
when you're dealing with a psychologist, you're really talking about
Mm,
confidentiality and, really making that promise that I can not only identify most of the time, was it not your fault, but it's also a solvable problem and you're not here alone.
I think that's the biggest thing, people knowing that they're not alone. And just even talking to you, you're providing such a safe space. And I feel like I want to share with you. So I hope anyone listening to this podcast will reach out to you. And that being said, in what capacity can people work with you? How can people reach out to you?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks, as I said, I'll extend a free 45-minute, chat to anyone who wants to contact me because
Amazing.
how else am I going to get to know you well enough to know whether I'm even the right fit? Beyond that, I have a special that is it's a 90-minute deep dive for $555.
Amazing.
Easy to remember, the 555.
Love the
I
angel
think a
numbers.
lot of the time, once people do that, they begin to look at some of our longer programs. There's a 90-day program that is, you do a big chunk of work in. And then we also have a year-long program. So I would say more often than not, people do that first 3 months and then they come back and they say, but I think I'd like to join this other system. And I'll say, that's okay. We can just transfer you in and whatever investment they've made gets applied to the cost of the year. So they don't lose out on any time. They just then gain access to the community that is there waiting to participate with them and hold space for them. So whether it's individually, as a kind of a sample, whether it's for our 90-day program or whether it's for a year-long program. And, I do occasionally have leaders that they really feel like they just want the time and space alone with me. And so I take about 4 to 6 VIP members per year. And it is, we are working together, 3 to 4 times a month. And then 4 times a year, we have a week-long retreat that we do privately with the members. So,
Beautiful. Yeah.
we do have ways to ensure that no matter how you feel about, what you want to share and with whom, we make sure that there's a way to work with us.
And how can people get in touch with you? Your website?
So yeah, I have a couple of websites. My parent website is sagebreslin.com. And that one it's under construction, but if you go in, you'll see a fully functional website. They're just working on the back end. For those who have had some experience with narcissistic abuse, the rosesystem.com is the one that really talks about all of that. And then sagewisdominstitute.com is our membership site, offers up ways to access all the services, just in case you want to know that stuff.
Amazing. We'll make sure to put those links in the show notes. So if listeners remember just one thing from this conversation, you and I have talked about a lot. You've provided us with a wealth of knowledge. One truth that they can carry with them, what would you want that to be for them? Anyone listening today?
Well, I'd like to say it's not your fault is really a truth that's super important.
I think that's important to know.
I think the other piece is it isn't just going to get better. Like, it's really okay to exit. This is not going to change on its own.
Permission to exit. Yeah. Wow. That's a great piece of information. Yeah. It's also really, really helpful. Yeah. I wish I had heard that.
Yeah.
Me too. Years ago. So, Dr. Breslin, thank you so much for being with me today. So, like I said, you provided us with such a wealth of knowledge, and I hope people reach out to you. We'll put those 3 websites in the show notes. And like I said, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.